Oh, hello. So good to see you again. Always a pleasure to have your company. Welcome back to the Gallery of Curiosities. I remain, as always, your humble host, Osgood. Well, I see my chorus has brought out their theremin. You know what that means. Halloween. A creature feature is in order for this evening's exhibit. Something beneath Victorian London, I think, where toshers plied their singular trade. Now, toshing, or sewer hunting, is often cited as one of the absolute worst jobs of the Victorian era, along with leech collectors and pure finders. If you don't know what pure is, well, I shall leave it for you to look up. Let's hope they do not make too much of a mess. I just had the carpets cleaned. This exhibit comes to us by way of author Brandon Daubs, whose stories have appeared in Grimdark Magazine, Darkfire, and Three Crows, and the anthologies All Hail Our Robot Conquerors and Knee-Deep in Grit, 2 bloody years of grim dark fiction. His short story, A Vague Inclination to Please, was finalist for WSFA's Small Press Award for 2018. Here is The Evil Eye by Brandon Daubs, performed by Mr. Daren Callow.
I know you're cold, and I know you're hungry, children, and I know you need to eat, and you don't seem to mind that awful smell coming off the Thames and out of the drains dug into the riverbank below us like gaping brick-ribbed wounds in the earth. But where you're trying to go, up in them drains, the filth and offal of the civilised world above stinks even worse. You might think you're desperate enough to go in there, but huddle round me now and listen to my story. It might just save your lives. You've got nowhere to go until the tide goes out anyway, eh? Might as well listen. My father always used to tell me a man's not measured by his money, but by his friends. By that account, you can call me nobody. Ain't a soul alive now remembers me by who I used to be. I had me a family, a plump wife and 2 bonny girls, but red fever took one, cholera another, and the frost of winter the last. The brickworks didn't take too kindly to my grieving too hard and kicked me to the curb. I would have starved, see, if not for the kind folks by the water, folks like your parents, desperate but clinging together, clinging to life. I fell in with the toshers and that was that. I'll never forget what I saw down in them sewers, lurking in the crushed heart o' the world, still struggling to beat with brick and mortar squeezing in tighter every day. I can feel its evil eye on me, even now. It started in jail. I was locked up once, see? Toshing, as I'm sure you kids know, ain't exactly a reputable occupation in this town. The bobbies had caught me one foggy day, lying in wait outside my favourite drain like a pack of damn bloodhounds. They beat me right proper and hauled me in. They took the 2pence and a waterlogged pocket watch I'd found. Damn shame. Could have fed a pack of you kids for a week on that, and chucked me in a cell. I was sitting there for a good long while, wondering if one of the boys back at the docks had at least got his pounds for turning me in, when a woman approached the bars to get a look at me. Now she was a proper lady, I tell you. There couldn't be no kind of good reason for her to talk to the likes of me. "Evening, ma'am," I said, and offered as elegant a bow as I could manage. The bobbies had worked me over good and proper. The woman looked me over. She squinched up her face and held a silk handkerchief to her nose and mouth on account of I smelled like a steaming pile of dung, I imagine. I didn't look like much either. Just a gangly man on the taller side, who might have been built as a bruiser at one time, but I was now all muscle gone to spindle under my long greased velveteen coat. The bobbies hadn't broken my lantern chain to my breast, thank God Almighty. I did take my long pole though, that I used for raking through the muck in the sewers. At least I still had my knee boots, turned down at the tops. "Good evening, sir," the lady replied. "I'm wondering, can you help me?" Now I was plumb curious what it was she could want with a tosher like me. I gave her what I hoped was my most sincere and charming smile. There might have been some resentment too. But you kids know how great is the difference between overflowing silver plates of the rich kids and your own. Like the damn ocean these days, ain't it? "You lose a ring or summat down the storm drains, missus?" I asked her. "Ah, well, tell those bobbies to let me loose and I'll see if I can find it for you." Of course, she would see neither hide nor hair at me ever again if I got loose at that station, and I think she knew that too. She might have been rich, but she weren't dumb. She narrowed her eyes at me and said, "If only it were just a ring. No, it's my son. A young boy, maybe 8. He was playing near an open trench. Lord God only knows why the nanny let him near it. And he fell in. The workers, they say they searched for him. For so long I stood at the edge of their pit waiting. But they would only tell me he must have been carried away by the current. You know, it's been raining rather hard. I'll pay you £100 to find him, or at least his body." The lady sobbed into her handkerchief. "My poor darling Wallace. And there was something else." I stepped up close to the bars to hear her better. Entranced by her story, sure, but more so by the prospect of £100. The lady looked deep into my eyes and I knew her pain. I'd felt her loss, mind you. She said, "They said there was something else down there. Some creature of Satan with one red eye that looked into their souls." God forbid any creature of Satan ever looked into my soul, or the souls of any poor bastard who lived down by the docks raking through muck for a living, I thought. Anyway, whatever those brickers might have seen down there, I'll give it a good whap with my toshing pole and down it would go into the muck. £100. I'd be condemned to the flames of hell if I let that kind of money get away. If only I'd known what waited for me down in the muck and the mire. I had 2 partners I worked with on the regular. One was a young girl by the name of Plum. She always had a bow in her hair and a right vicious brute of a cat that followed her around. She called him Arthur. Proper line-up mangy beast was, damn near 2 stone in weight I reckon, and mean to boot. Ne'er let me pet him, that's for sure, nor anyone else save Plum, whom he barely put up with. The second was a ripe, grizzled old salt we called the Sturgeon. Says he fought Shaka and the Zulu down in Africa, by gum, and the things he'd seen happen there must have right scarred his soul, because he weren't right in the head by any account, I tell you. Troubled eyes he had. Haunted eyes. £100? Are ye daft, nobody? Plum said to me. Her monster cat lurked by her ankles, glaring up at me with its glowing, vicious eyes like I was just a big meal to him. "A mother's love don't come with no price tag," the Sturgeon mumbled. His watery eyes never focused just right, like he was looking at something behind me whenever we spoke. His grip tightened on the hilt of his steel bollocks dagger stuck into the belt at his waist. He had a mean musket pistol shoved into the belt on the other side he'd named Maud after his wife who'd left him. "She's getting a bargain at £100, and you know the money's just paper to these people, Plum." Plum crossed her eyes and looked away. "Aye," she said, "I suppose." "Right then," I said. drew myself up as proud as I could muster. I was still clutching at my courage then, you see, with no clue as to the evil that awaited me. Our patroness has told us she lost the boy near Arlington, so that's where we'll start our search. Cheerio, up we go. I hoisted myself up into the largest of the drains dug into the shore, a monster we called Victoria. Perhaps that was a mite unkind, but if Her Majesty was doing anything to help the poor, we hadn't seen hide nor hair of it yet, if we was still digging around in all the filth and offal of the London elite, am I right? Me and the others, we lit our lamps chained to our breast pockets of our coats and trudged up the drain and into the heart of the labyrinth, water running under us, water dripping down from up above. We didn't see nothing but the usual bugs, spiders and a few rats, even if they were slow to scarper at the sight of us. One of them even bared his fangs at me, the little bugger. Things went smooth until we got close to Arlington, and then things didn't seem quite so right. I'll try to explain what it was, kids, but it was like you was walking along in the woods, having a corker of a time, and then suddenly you don't know the trees. You don't know that river. You hear voices whispering. You see something through the trees, something that's looking right through you. It's in your head, making you see things that aren't there, making you feel fear, twisting, turning your memories around. You've got no God-cursed idea where you are, and that was us, down in the darkness of the sewers, stuck at a crossroads. All the paths led down, and that weren't right. Each of us looked down a different way, the water trickling from a deep pool in the centre and pipes up above. I gripped at my forehead. Something was in there for all of us, twisting it all around. Creature of Satan indeed. He was down here, somewhere, close. I knew it then. "Where are we, nobody?" asked Plum, and her monster cat growled into the darkness. Well, by all accounts, we ought to be right under Arlington, I said, and I thought it was true. For her sake, I kept the tremble from my voice. I'd been toshing for 10 years by then, and I'd taken the correct path. I was sure of it. I looked up and all around and listened into the trickling water, when another sound caught my ear. A faint, snuffling sort of sound, like a child sobbing. I cupped my hands to my mouth and called, "Oi, Wallace! That you, boy? Your mum sent us, chappie. We don't mean you no harm. Come on into the light now." My lantern cast its flickering light down the tunnel ahead of us, and I saw a massive shadow. It could have been about the size of a child, but the look of it didn't seem right with me. I hesitated, but started forward anyway, until the sturgeon laid a hand on my shoulder. "Maybe you ought to keep your voice down," he said. "Stay here, you two, and I'll check it out. I'm the muscle around here, you know." Well, that sturgeon, he were brave enough, that's for sure. I stood with Plum and the cat Arthur while the sturgeon crept forward and down to the turn in the bricks ahead. His lantern lit the walls a little further on than mine did, and I saw him pause at the corner and turn. "Wallace, that you, boy? Come on, let's get your arse moving. We've got to get out before the tide comes in." What happened next, I'll never forget in all my days. He cut off his talking, the sturgeon did, and he screamed, "Christ Jesus!" and he pulled out his musket pistol. The blast rung something terrible throughout all the sewers. Plum screamed and clapped her hands over her ears, and Arthur the cat let out a god-awful yowl and bounded away from us into the darkness. It weren't the sound of the gun that scared me, though. I was looking right at Sturgeon, and one minute he was standing there, and the next something leapt on him, piled right into his chest, bore him to the ground. The sturgeon pulled out his bollock dagger, but the thing on him swiped into the trickling black stink of the trench. I only saw for a moment what the thing was before the sturgeon's lantern light went out. A mass of fur and muscle it was, a damn sight near the size of a man. And even in the darkness I could see one of its eyes, red, glowing, peering into me, through me. It bored into me, that evil eye, and it put in me the most awful fear, like my life hung by a thread between two gleaming silver scissor blades. I screamed and I ran, and Plum ran with me, and we were so scared we didn't know which way we was going. Listen to me, kids. Gather closer now. I'm not trying to be noble when I say this, but when I saw that creature of Satan, I wasn't thinking about the £100 anymore. See, I fancy myself a bloke with nothing left to lose. But as Plum clung terrified to me and screamed for her cat Arthur, and I remembered the sound of poor Wallace crying, I knew I was wrong. Dead wrong. By God, Mary and Jesus, I had to get them poor kids out of those sewers alive. I don't know how far we ran, or in what direction, but soon the waters trickling down from the bricks and the pipes above turned red, and Plum and me ran through a fine proper rain of blood. Pig guts and other offal slopped down the tunnel walls and caked our walkway in greasy fat. Our boots was slipping around in it like we was wearing ice skates on the frozen waters of a serpentine. We must have been under Butcher's Row, awash in the unwanted refuse of the meat cutters. I knew this weren't a good place to be by any account, as it was far from the drain we'd climbed in and even farther from Arlington, but at least we'd gotten away from whatever that beast had been. Some kind of animal, I reckon, but it hadn't been like any animal I'd ever seen before on God's green earth, and there had been the voices too, and the visions. Plum stumbled and almost fell, and I caught her under her arm. Easy now, lass, I said. We made it far enough, I think. It's a shame about the sturgeon, but keep your chin up. He's having a little chinwag with St. Peter now, putting in a good word for us. Plum sniffed and rubbed at her eyes. Even so, he was a good old sort, she said. Always had a penny for me every time he came out from the drains. He found me this bow in my hair and washed it off for me. He brought me Arthur when them other lads were gonna kill him for stealing their fish. She looked up at me, and rosy cheeks now smeared with blood. He said to me, "You take care of this cat like I took care of you, you hear?" And so I did. Do you think Arthur will be all right? I straightened up Plum's bow and gave her a slap on the back. No, that old beast gets his breakfast from here if I'm not mistaken, I said. These sewers might well be a pleasant restaurant to the likes of him. He knows these tunnels better than we do, and no mistake, he'll be just fine. To be honest, I had good reason to believe Arthur had been eaten by the thing what got the sturgeon, but that's just not something one says to a worried young girl, now is it? We can't live without that little boy, said Plum. I'd never known a girl with a heart as stout as Plum's. She must have known what I was thinking. But if I let her out first, I would have to wait for the tides to come in and recede again before I could haul myself back up into old Victoria, and poor Wallace might not have that kind of time. Aye, I said. That we do. Follow me closely now. You know what lurks in this part of the tunnels. Indeed, we hadn't gone far back the way I'd come before we saw the first right ugly vermin. I turned a corner and there he was, up on his haunches, chewing a discarded piece of leather gripped tight in his little paws. He looked up at us. His ears went back and our lantern light shone red in his beady eyes. Plum and me passed him right quiet. He didn't make no move, but I could see in his eyes he was wondering if we might make a tastier morsel than the old piece of shoe he'd got. Plum piped up to warn me of 2 more rats up ahead, gnawing a bone on the opposite side of the stream of blood, and I shushed her with a sharp squeeze on her shoulder. That bone looked right awful, like it had been a man's arm once. On days of heavy rain, I'd seen drains along the Thames spew human bones out, tangled in the shreds of velveteen tosher coats, some of them still clutching their poles. Where there's 3 rats, there's about 1,000 more, old Sturgeon always used to say, and as we walked they started to follow us. There was 5 now, then 10, mangy, greasy little brutes. Keep quiet. That was the key. Keep quiet and walk like you belonged there, like you wasn't afraid. Desperate, blighted creatures they was. Then I brought my boot down and I heard the crunch and the scream, and I knew I'd trod on one of the little bastards, and his shrieks for help echoed throughout the tunnels, and the 10 rats behind us were suddenly 20 or more. They climbed out of the fat caked on the walls, they climbed out of the bricks, they splashed out of the river of blood, and one of them leapt for Plum, and she screamed and smacked it away with her pole. And then they was on us like a pack of bloodhounds, leaping, biting. I fought them off, cussing and jabbing and swinging and crushing them with my toshing pole, just good enough to grab Plum and turn and run, splashing through the muck and the mire while more rats piled out of their burrows and pelted after us, leaping over each other and shrieking. Oh, by God, but the shrieking sound they made still haunts my dreams to this day. Louder and louder it got, and closer too. We ran until my lungs couldn't suck in no more air, and I knew this was it. I knew in my heart. I turned to Plum. "I'm right sorry, love," I said. "I'm sorry we got to go this way." But Plum wasn't listening to a word I said. She wasn't ready to give up like I was. She weren't as weak. We tore down a corner and through a crossroads, and suddenly she shouted, "Arthur!" And there he was, like one of the knights of old, leaping out of the darkness, pelting full tilt toward danger. He ran past us and he faced the rat pack. He yowled and he bared his fangs. His notched ears went down flat o'er his big meaty head, and he bristled up to double his size. Claws like daggers sprang from his manky paws, and he gave those rats the eye fierce enough to slow 'em down a little at least. And there was death in those eyes for them little rats. By God, there was hell's own fury burning there. "Arthur, no!" screamed Plum, and her little voice was so full of worry it broke my heart. Because you see, these rats, oh children, these aren't no ordinary rats that live in these sewers. These are big, mean, desperate creatures, and a whole horde of them too. Even men are nothing but a wet bag of sweet trees to these little blighters. And I think even Arthur knew that, bless him. He was a right noble beast, he was. I took back every curse I ever gave him, and I knew that cat had himself a soul more noble than any man I'd ever met. Arthur let out another yowl of challenge. He clawed, he swiped, and he broke filthy rat spines between his jaws, but they had him in the end, they did. Swarmed all over him like ants on a crumb of sugar. Old Arthur had his eyes on Plum before he disappeared under a heap of greasy old soaked vermin. Poor Plum, sobbing fit to flood the old sewer, tried to go back to him, and I had to grab her and drag her along like a sack of onions. I felt it again once we was in the clear. That eye on me, looking through me, filling me with dread. I don't know how I knew, but I did. We was close to Wallace and the beast too. The creature of Satan was in my head, but I was too enraged to feel fear. I trod on through turn and crossroad, dragging Plum, trusting my instincts. "Whoever's in there," I hissed, "I'm coming coming for ye. I knew I'd have to shut that evil eye good and proper, any way I could. The sewers was right awful anywhere you went, but especially in the deep parts, when a tunnel was got small and you could feel the weight of all London crushing down on you. Plum and I slogged through water up to our knees, praying to Jesus that no rats would hear us. We had to be close, I knew. If we weren't, then we were 40 feet or more beneath the earth, and the tide was coming in, and the candles in our lanterns were burned down almost to nothing. At least we'd left the red mess of Butcher's Row behind us. But if we didn't find Wallace soon, Plum and I were as good as drowned. "Arthur!" Plum sobbed a little as we slogged. She didn't seem to notice the little boons that appeared floating in the silt we slogged through, or caught along the mud on the sides of the tunnel. A silk handkerchief, a silver watch, coins, glittering copper and gold, and a ring. We turned a corner and Plum and I slogged into a wider, round room. The first thing I noticed were the treasures. By gum, you've never seen such a sight, children. Boots and coats, some of the finest in London, piled up in mismatched heaps. Gold, silver and jewels glimmered here and there. Coins, discarded cutlery, and even a silver goblet, a child's doll, and waterlogged books bound in leather and brass. Then I noticed the bones. Human skulls grinned up at me from between the scraps of precious refuse and bobbed in the foul pit of muck in the centre of the room. Some of them still had shreds of meat attached. One wore the uniform of a brickman. I almost gave up hope I would find young Wallace alive, but then there he was, a pale little shape lying in the mud, his noble boy livery caked in filth. God almighty, something had taken a proper chomp out of his leg, and I imagine whatever had done for Sturgeon must have dragged this kid here to enjoy at its leisure. A sweet treat for later, you might say. Plum and I slogged over to him, and I laid a hand over his mouth. I felt a breath on my hand, weak, but there it was. And he stirred a little from the stink of my fingers. His little eyes fluttered open, and at once they drifted behind me, and the lad screamed. Not at me, though. Oh, no, sir. There was something behind me much worse than my ugly mug. That little prince saved my life just then. I whirled around and something big lunged for me, and I hit it with the toshing pole I gripped tight in both hands like a quarterstaff, shoved its bulk off me and got away only with a mean scratch to my face. Blood oozed down the side of my neck, but I still had my life for what it was worth. I looked into the eyes of the ugliest beast I'd ever seen on God's green earth. He was a rat, by Jesus, or at least he had been at one time. Only Satan knew what manner of creature he was now. He stood up on two haunches like a man, his back bent, his claws hung out before him like two gnarled hands. He was as tall as Plum, big as a dog, big as a wolf even. Bigger than that. His tail was long, worm trailing in the black water behind him, and his eyes was the work of the devil. One was black and beady, a cunning rat's eye, and the other were a scarred red mess, bulging out of his long skull, pulsing and thick with veins. He fixed me with this eye, and I knew fear. With God as my witness, this beast wormed its way into my mind as he had done before, but worse. If he was still a rat, He was the king of rats, a dark sorcerer among them, and he had me under his evil spell. He shrieked at me, spewing ropey strands of spit, bearing yellow choppers as long as me forearm. Only one thought kept me from freezing up. I was the only thing standing between this rat bastard and Wallace and Plum. "Get the hell out of here, girl," I said. "Take Wallace and get out. Take the £100 for yourself." She tried to argue with me, God bless her, and I barked as mean as I could, "Run!" and the king of rats shrieked and leapt for me again. I screamed and fought for my life like a dog in a fighting pit. The king of rats was mean and he was fast, and I couldn't look away from his evil eye, by God, but I held him at bay until Plum hauled young Wallace to his feet and they slogged out of there and away as fast as they could. Then they were gone. I'd done it, but they needed more time. This creature of Satan would go after him if I didn't put a stop to him. It was me, or it was him, by gum. He knocked me down into the water and I lost grip of me toshing pole. No, I was splashing my hand around in the filth and the piss, trying to find it, when my fingers closed on something else. By some miracle of God, I had pulled up a chipped old sword like bloody Excalibur. I was king too now. No, both of us was. I staggered to my feet. The king of rats shrieked and leapt for me, and I cried out as his yellow razor teeth sank into my shoulder, clear through, I reckon, and he in turn shrieked in animal pain when I howled and plunged my chipped little sword into his greasy chest. We staggered around in circles, locked together, two of God's most wretched creatures, dancing a twisted waltz, both of us spraying blood, sweating and growling. He looked deep into my soul with his evil eye, and I could not believe what I saw. I was him, as clear as I am me sitting before you now. I was a king of rats. But he weren't no king then. He was some noble boy's pet in a gilded cage with all the strawberries he could eat. And then, one day, by the kid's cruel whim, he was dumped down the drain and forgotten. He fought his way to the top of the rat pack, and by the gift of some dark force, he could see into the selfish hearts of men. He could grip 'em with his evil eye. Well, I thought, let him see me then. Let him taste the life of London's poor. I wrestled with his mind like I was wrestling with his body, and all of my life spilled into him. Eating a heel of bread on Christmas with my pa, and that was it. Us two, starving and cold, but we was together. That's what mattered, until he died of the croup in my arms. I let the king of rats see me working in the brickworks, and I let him feel my tears on my face as I clutched my wife, burning up from red fever like she was on fire inside. The doctor screaming at me to leave her or I would catch it too. I let that rat watch my daughter waste away from cholera, till I found her in bed one morning, withered like a little prune, dead, light as a twig. I let him see my other girl frozen in a back alley near Westminster, clutching a little basket of flowers for sale while snow fell in sheets and clung to her little curls of hair. I poured all my pain and hate into that king of the rats, and he must not have liked what he was tasting, because he spat me out and staggered back shrieking, pulled himself off my sword and slumped against his big pile of treasures. He closed his evil eye, and he was just a rat again in that moment, looking up at me in wonder with his other one. I could have finished him off, I suppose, driven my blade to the hilt into him, but something stopped me. I don't know what it was. You see, children, we was brothers in a way. Two sides of the same coin. I let the sword tumble from my grip, held my bloody shoulder and staggered away. The water in the tunnel outside was up to my waist now, but I could still beat the tide. Of course I did. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be here talking to you now, would I? The bobbies led me to Wallace's mum's house. I knocked on her door, winced and clutched at my bandaged shoulder. It was a miracle I didn't die from some evil infection. The lady I'd spoken to when I was locked up in jail opened the door and she saw Plum standing behind me with the bonny lad Wallace. And she was all smiles and blubbering then. She stretched out her arms and she didn't mind one bit that Wallace stank to high heaven as he ran and leapt into her arms. And she held him tight. I might have hated her for the fact that such a tender moment were often denied to us living in the muck. But I weren't made of stone. I teared up a bit myself. At last the lady turned toward me with her eyes brimming full of tears and she smiled at me. "Thank you," she said. "It weren't just me," I said, and stepped aside and ushered Plum forward. "I had a lot of help." The noble lady looked into Plum's face and the damnedest thing happened. She didn't recoil in disgust or turn her nose up or look right through Plum like she wasn't there. She reached out at once, paused when Plum jerked away, waited, and then wiped some filth from her cheek. Plum looked up at the face of this noble lady with her eyes sparkling, and this lady must have been even more noble than I thought, 'cause she said, "Have you got a place to stay, sweet pea? Would you like to spend the night with us? I'll have the nanny cut you a piece of treacle tart." "Can she stay with us longer than that, Mum?" Wallace asked. His mother smiled. "If she has a mind to," she said. And in that moment I thought she must be an angel. Plum looked to me, and I gave her a little wink, and she walked inside without a word, like a girl in a dream. The lady turned to me and, bless her, she invited me in too, but I was an old dog, out on his own too long, and I was wary of the bright gilded inside of that house, like a golden rat's cage. I took my money, £50, that would do me good, nice and proper, and told the lady to give £50 to Plum. Said ta-ta to the bobbies and I was on my way. The lady called after me, "Oh, but wait, sir, you never gave me the pleasure of your name. Please, please, who are you?" I looked over my injured shoulder at her, reached up and tipped me hat. "Don't worry yourself about that, your ladyship," I said. "I'm nobody, ma'am." Then I walked off through the fog. I got myself a warm bath at the pub, ate a shepherd's pie and bought an extra haunch of mutton to take with me to the banks of the River Thames. I sat at the edge of the open drain, Victoria, and placed the hot haunch of mutton there on a chipped stoneware plate. I didn't see the King of Rats take it, but when next I looked, the mutton was gone. Now, listen up, young ones. There was a day when us poor was right drowned in the sludge of industrial waste. Our cries for mercy naught but the squeak of vermin to the upper crust. But those times they are changing, slow but sure. The workers, they fight for every little squeak of turn to the grinding wheel of our fate, but they push and they push. There's clean water in the park now. Silver-plated fountains free for all of Christ's lambs to drink from. There's work, honest work as a shop boy, a railway worker or a cobbler. And there's cleaner factories that won't kill you outright from the cotton dust and the flour in the air. Old Victoria, aye, she had a part to play in it too, whether grudgingly or not, we may never know. It's too late for me, but for you kids, it isn't a sunny day yet by any stretch, but the fog is beginning to clear for you, I think. And if my tale's done nothing else for you, keep this in mind. Stay out of the sewers! That beast with the evil eye, he's still in there, you know.
Perhaps I should have saved this one for Christmas, what with poor little Plum being taken in by the nice posh lady. That's practically a Hallmark Channel ending. Oh well. I shall find something else for the Yule. This evening's reader was Daren Callow, a writer, voice actor, and musician who is based in Hove on the south coast of the United Kingdom. A medium-sized cannon shot from the English Channel. As an actor, Mr. Callow has lent his voice to Brighton Theatre of the Air and 2-Bit Productions audio dramas. He also finds time to record his own steampunk podcast, Tales of New Albion, featuring original comedy material voiced by a cast of approximately thousands. Well, it's nearly time. I need to finish the Halloween refreshments before the neighborhood urchins come trick-or-treating. I assure you there will be more tricks than treats in store for them here. Do take care, and come visit us again next time at the Gallery of Curiosities. Gallery of Curiosities is produced under a Creative Commons International 4.0 Non-Commercial Attribution No Derivatives license. Story copyrights remain with the authors. If you like the show, scry us on your favorite podcatcher and conjure a few stars or reviews for us. This episode was produced in October of 2024. For more information, do visit us on the web at gallerycurious.com. Kevin, have you finished putting the razor blades into the apples? What do you mean you need a band-aid? I assure you, no one is going to notice with all the fake blood on everything that is a trap.